Thank you for joining us again, and I wanted to share a little bit more on the roles of the bee. So when we have the different roles that are involved in the hive, we have three roles, or three individuals, if you will. We have the drone, we have the queen bee, and then we have the worker bee. Let's go a little bit more in depth in the drone. The drone is also known as your male, okay? And the male drone has one major responsibility, and his major responsibility is to help reproduce with the queen bee. So his responsibility is to reproduce. And this role is huge in the survival of all of the bees, okay? Now, when we talk about the queen, okay, she plays a vital role as well. As a matter of fact, she's almost like the coordinator. She is the teacher. She's the one controlling everything that's happening in the environment. Now, the really interesting thing about the queen is that one of her roles is to lay eggs, okay? So she'll lay her eggs. As a matter of fact, this is a pretty interesting fact. She lays about 1,000 eggs in one day. So talk about the reproduction and everything that's happening inside of the hive, okay? Something else to talk about when we're discussing about the queen is that she does a really good job of communicating. When she communicates with all of the other bees, she uses her antennas to send off signals. Now, depending on the chemicals that are released, the chemicals telling the worker bees and the drone bees whether there's danger ahead or whether that she is hungry to help with the production of the eggs. Okay, next we have the worker. Now the worker bee does a lot of work. So let me show you a visual aid real quick. So when we have the worker bee develops and creates the hive. And also you'll notice that there's a bunch of cells. Remember how in earlier segments we were talking about cells? Each cell, the queen is able to lay all her eggs, and then goes through the process of the life cycle of a bee. So the worker creates the hive, cleans the cells, and also flies and scouts around to make sure that there's no predators endangering the hive. Okay. So the worker again cleans the cells, builds the hives, and protects the hive. So you could say that the worker bee does a lot of the work, but in all actuality, the drone helps the queen reproduce, the queen lays her eggs, and the workers help the whole production of what goes on within the hive. So now that we've discussed a little bit about the roles and responsibilities inside the hive, now I want to talk to you about what's happening outside of the hive. So another thing that the worker does is it goes and looks and forages for food, okay? They want to look for food. Why is food important? Well, the food that they bring back into the hive allows for the production of the eggs with the queen bee, and it also helps with the production and the growth and development of the larvae. And that's part of the segment in which we talked about in segment number 1 with the life cycle of a bee. So, how does a worker go look for food? Well, once it flies out of the hive and once it looks and finds flowers, different flowers, it wants to communicate, say it with me, communicate with other bees inside of the hive. How do they communicate if they can't talk? Well, the worker bees, they do what's called a little dance. And when they dance, while they're dancing, they're communicating with the other bees to letting them know exactly where they can find the food so they can bring it back to the hive. So, for instance, once the worker bee scouts and finds food, it comes back to the hive. Once it comes back into the hive, it gets the attention of all of the other bees. It gets the attention of all of the other bees. And this particular worker, once it comes back, it wants to communicate with all the other bees. So it does a little dance. And when it dances, depending on how close it buzzes and circulates back around, will tell the other bees exactly where it's at. Now notice the direction in which the bee is buzzing. That means that the flower is in this direction. Okay? If it buzzes and it kind of goes like this, the wavelength is a little bit long, that's telling the other bees that the flower is in a long, it's further away. If the wavelength or the buzzing is really, 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 really close, that's notifying the bees that the flower is nearby. So it dances. So let me just do this dance one more time. Let me see if you can guess where the flower's at in this dance. You ready? Here we go. I'm going to pause. The bee has just danced for all of the other bees. Which direction do you think the flower is at? This direction. That's where the flower is at. Now, is the flower near or is the flower far away for the other bees? It's near. How do you know it's near? Because of the wavelength here, that the buzzing that the bee did. It's compact. So it's letting everyone else know that the flower or the pollen or the nectar is nearby so that it can provide food for the queen. That's an also big, huge responsibility for the worker bees. Now let's recap real quick. The drone is the male bee that helps the queen reproduce. Once the queen is able to reproduce, she's able to lay all her eggs, approximately about 1,000 eggs per day inside of the cells. Everyone plays a big role, especially the worker, from building the hive to protecting the hive, cleaning out the cells, and going to scout and look for food. Everyone plays a role in and out of the hive. So again, I want to thank you everyone for participating in this segment. Do me a favor and share all the knowledge that you've obtained within these segments and put these into practice and share with your friends about all the key vocabulary and the roles in which the bee has in our environment. Thank you so much. If you would like any clarifications, we will have a Google Meets in which we will have an interactive teacher there to explain a little bit more in depth for any questions that you may have. Again, thank you so much for tuning in here at the Valley Nature Center.
Thank you.